The gospel reading for today is from Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 to 12. The Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and to test Jesus they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. He answered them, "When it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. An evil and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah." Then he left them and went away. When the disciples reached the other side, they had forgotten to bring any bread. Jesus said to them, "Watch out, and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." They said to one another, "It is because we have brought no bread." And becoming aware of it, Jesus said, "You of little faith, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many baskets you gathered? How could you fail to perceive that I was not speaking about bread? Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." Then they understood that he had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. May God grant us understanding of his word today. Amen.
When I was a kid in grade school, I was absolutely fascinated with space. I was fascinated with space all through grade school and all through middle school and up and even into high school. Anything space was big time for me. And there was another little stage in grade school when I was fascinated with the whole dinosaur thing. And so it's from that perspective that I share this with you. 66 million years ago, there was an event called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. That was when an asteroid that was at least 10 kilometers, that's 6 miles, 10 kilometers in diameter, hit the Yucatan Peninsula. You can show that now, Alex. Alex, the picture. Ah, good. That big asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula. You know, if you look at that, you'll know where that is. That's the peninsula out of Mexico. And to the right, near the tip there, is Cancun. And then around the corner, it would be Cozumel. So you know where it is now if you've been there. Asteroid hit that. And scientists tell us that nothing on the planet, any living creature on the planet over 55 pounds survived. Now, I mention this because on July the 25th, we had an event, and they named the asteroid the Asteroid 2019 OK, and you can show the next picture, Alex. And it whizzed by the Earth within 45,000 miles. The moon is way more than that, something like 180,000 miles. So the asteroid that whizzed by was inside the orbit of the moon. Go ahead and show the next picture. There's what they say happened just on July the 25th. It was only 200 to 400 feet in diameter. It wasn't a 6-mile asteroid by any chance, but even so, they called it a city killer. But because it was so small, scientists say we probably weren't in much danger because because the actual chances were slim that even if it got into the Earth's atmosphere, it would break up before it hit the Earth. And even if it remained intact, 70% of the Earth is ocean, and the chances were very good it would wind up in the water somewhere. Go ahead and show the last clip. That's the picture they picked up of the asteroid coming through. That's on one of their super telescopic things. And NASA knew it was coming 2 or 3 days ahead of time, although the announcement didn't come out just until it was here. And so they saw it coming, but they weren't worried about it. My daughter works at a church in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And one of the members of the church is an astrophysicist who he's now retired, he worked in the National Lab. And his job was to watch for asteroids and figure out how to either move them out of the way or blow them up if they got too close to the Earth. And he told me, I asked him questions about it, and he told me that the technology to do that, to either move them or blow them up, is not that difficult. He says, we got that down. He said, what's difficult is mobilizing in time. That's the challenge. So if this had been one of those 6-mile asteroids coming through and they had 2 or 3 days notice, wouldn't have been enough time to mobilize it. It was coming straight at us. So that's a little scary. Even if it had been a dinosaur killer, we would be the dinosaurs today. But the good news is that NASA does know where 90% of the biggest asteroids are. 90%. That leaves 10%, right? We don't know. NASA does not know where the other 10% are. We know where 90% of the big asteroids are. We don't know where 10% are. That tells you something. We know that we sometimes live on the edge, even now. So what does any of this have to do with today's passage? Jesus said this to the authorities, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. And what he meant by signs of the times is what's going on right here on earth, what we are doing as human animals who roam this planet. We do not know our own signs. So right after Jesus said that to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, he tells us the disciples really didn't know what Jesus was talking about when he said that. They knew that Jesus had said something about the yeast of the Pharisees. But that was a day later, and they had already traveled to the new place, and someone was supposed to bring the bread for the troop and didn't bring it. So when he talked about the yeast of the Pharisees, suddenly the disciples thought that Jesus was talking about them forgetting the bread that day. But that's not what he was talking about. He was still talking about their need, the human need, to worry about signs in the sky rather than worry about real human need and human reality as it goes by every day. See, we humans are prone to worry about stuff that has nothing to do with focusing on our earthly struggle. We get distracted, we deflect, and we deny. Anything that may threaten us, anything that may tell us about a reality we don't want to see, we are pretty good at moving away from that reality. We know what that's like. In the past 24 hours, we have witnessed one of the worst mass shooting days in U.S. history. I went to bed last night thinking about El Paso. I woke up this morning and read about Dayton, Ohio. Just hours apart. Yet the voice inside our heads, the shooting in El Paso was in a mall. The shooting in Dayton, Ohio was on a street that had a lot of night places and people were going to and fro at 1 a.m. in the morning. Places where we all wind up sooner or later. And yet, in the back of our minds, we hear the stories about these things over and over and over again, endlessly. And yet, there's a voice in there that says, well, that can't happen to me. That voice goes on in my head. Oh, yeah, it happened to them. Can't happen to me. I wouldn't be in such a place at such a time. But the reality is clear, folks. Whether we like it or not, we are not always safe in this life, and it has nothing to do with asteroids or boogeymen outside our national boundaries. It's happening right in our midst, arising out of a culture from which we come and with which we are all familiar. We are not safe in our schools. We are not safe in our malls. We are not safe in movie theaters. We are not safe on the street. We are not even safe in our churches anymore. We are afraid. And we all make up for it by polishing our talking points that we may convince ourselves otherwise. You know, in this world, we don't much stare at the signs in the sky. But we read Twitter feeds constantly. We read Facebook posts unendingly. We choose our own news pundits to believe. And the result is, none of us knows the truth. None of us, regardless of who we listen to and what we read. We don't know the truth about this world and about our life in it. All we know is our version of that. And that's been true throughout the march of history. So Matthew tells us this. Then the disciples understood that Jesus had not told them to beware of the yeast of bread, but of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The thing you have to understand is the context that Matthew understood. And we need to be clear about this. Jesus, when he lived on this earth, questioned and criticized the preeminent religious authority of the day, which was the authority of the day. If you were a religious authority, you were the authority. It is an historical mistake to think that Jesus Christ was ever a popular man when he walked among us, that he was a popular man among those who supported church or state or both. He simply wasn't. But the bread that we celebrate today at this table reminds us that although the world intentionally broke Jesus, it was God, not us, who made things whole again. It's good that we come to the table today. After hearing stories, 2 stories of shootings in America within the last 24 hours, our society, our culture, we're broken today. There's only one thing that can make us whole: the presence and the grace of God in our midst, binding us together, helping us to speak to each other, helping us to seek to understand better what this human struggle is about, and know that we need together to affirm the presence of our Creator. Our world is full of scary, unexpected things, whether they whiz by us in space or whether they happen right here on earth. Even so, God is faithful and ever present, no matter what. I've spent 40 years in ministry. I've been in hospital rooms and people's homes and other places where I have seen and witnessed the worst of what can happen to us as people. And yet, I cannot tell you how many countless times I have seen and felt the healing, grace-filled presence of God in the midst of human tragedy. We cannot possibly see everything that is coming at us in life, but we can and do know that God in Christ is with us here and now. It's hard to know the answers to these struggles. It really is. We debate them all the time. But Jesus suggests that looking towards our human needs, emotional, spiritual, physical, paying attention to human need more, and pontificating less is a very good start. May we find and live with this grace in times we can't always figure out. Thanks be to God for God's presence. Amen.